Hello, 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 and thank you all for joining me today. We are going to be talking about immigrating and whether or not it is worth it. So, as always, as you're coming in, please do let me know in the comment section where you are watching from. This also just gives us time for people to get alerted that we are currently live. So, let me know where you are watching from. And I absolutely love that I had Bulex traders like 55 minutes before the live saying countdown. I'm looking excited. I'm looking forward to it. And they are based in Durban. So very excited to have this conversation with you all today. So please let me know where you are watching from. Kanyisa says they're watching from South Africa, in Cape Town specifically. Thank you so much for joining. And I can also see that you're watching from Facebook. So I also always love seeing the integration from all of the different platforms because I recently started going live on multiple platforms at the same time. And then Lisa is watching from Zimbabwe. Thank you so much for joining as well. And as always, as we're going through the discussion, because it's a conversation. I want to have a conversation with you, hear what your thoughts are, any questions that you may have. I'm happy to answer things that I am able to answer based on my experience as somebody who has moved to Canada. So Zintle says, hey, Busi, South Africa, Gauteng. Hey, my friend. Thank you for joining. Kongi is watching from Limpopo in South Africa. Excited to hear this. I think this is a very, very important conversation for anyone who might think about immigrating. You know, you're thinking about it. Maybe you've already done it, and you're just asking yourself, like, is this worth it? Is it worth the experience? So, let's talk about it. We have Zintle, who is watching from Cape Town in South Africa. And then Nhlanhla Tamsanqa Khoza from Germiston, Gauteng. And then we have Tammy watching from the garage. Why did you go to the garage? Like he was just in here like a few seconds ago. But this is my husband and he's watching from the garage. Thank you for watching, Tammy. And then Tandega says, hi, Busi, based in Durban, Morningside. You're just awesome and love your content. Keep going. Thank you so much, Tandega. Thank you so much. And Tassia is watching from Centurion. Okay, thank you all for joining. Thank you all for joining. Now, for anyone who might be coming across me for the first time, my name is Busi, and I am a South African Canadian who moved to Canada back in 2019 with her family. We recently became Canadian citizens, and there's a lot of people I know who will reach out and they're asking questions and they just want to understand and know whether immigrating is worth it or not. So, is immigrating worth it? Let's talk about it. So, you may find that where you're looking to move, like for me as an example, I'm coming from South Africa, right? I moved from South Africa to Canada and I have lived in Europe previously. For anyone who doesn't know, I lived in Europe for a year, went back to South Africa, and then moved to Canada. But while I was looking to move from South Africa to Canada, somebody else was looking to move from whatever country they were living in to South Africa. And when I'm looking to move to Canada, there's someone who's living in Canada and has probably lived in Canada for years and years who's looking to move away from Canada to somewhere else. And they are looking for greener pastures or different experiences. And so, where you might be looking and thinking, okay, there are things that are not working, somebody else might be looking at where you are thinking, I want to go and experience this type of life, right? So, with all of the movement that is going on, is all of it worth it? So let's talk about the potential positive and negative aspects that can come with immigration, and we'll get to see whether it's worth it or not. So, some of the potential negative aspects that you can come across when you are moving, if you are somebody who's looked at the process, maybe you've already started going through the process, you'll notice that it is a very time consuming and often stressful process just going through that immigration portion of things. And that is something to consider when you're thinking of whether it's worth it or not, because there'll be complex legal procedures that you have to go through. There'll be paperwork, regulations you need to adhere to, navigating different immigration systems, especially if you are looking to potentially move to different places and you're still trying to figure out, do I maybe want to go to Canada? Do I want to go to the US? Do I want to go to Australia? Do I want to go to South Africa? There's so many things that you will have to look at, especially if you are not fully settled on one place where you're just focused on the process of one particular place. So that is something that can take a huge amount of time and can also be very stressful because there's so many things that can go into it. You can also find that one of the potential negatives is having to use a huge chunk of your savings. Whether if you're moving to Canada, for example, there is the immigration costs, the application fees, that portion of the costs. And then there will also be a number of things that are required from you depending on the program that you would be moving under. So things like paying for your IELTS test, the English test, if you're completing it with IELTS. At the time we were doing it and we lived in South Africa, it cost around 2,500 rands per person, as an example. I know right now that cost is well over 4,000. So obviously, if you're going to wait and you're going to immigrate in the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now, that cost keeps going up. And you also have to do your evaluations of your education background, what you have as your qualifications. That needs to be evaluated by an organization like WES. You will have to do medical exams, and these are all costs that are going to come from you. So you find yourself having to use a huge chunk of your savings. And when you do get your immigration or visa documents saying, yes, you can move, then you have to book your flights, find temporary accommodation, and then you'll have to settle in the country and find a permanent place to stay. Think about purchasing furniture. If you're moving with your furniture from back home, there's a lot of costs that are involved that can quickly, that can add up pretty quickly. Okay, so let me just see if we have any comments. So Dimakato says, hi, Busi. Thank you so much for the information. I used to watch from Bloemfontein. I have relocated to New Zealand with my family. Congratulations, Dimakato. I am excited for you. I am so excited for you. I hope you are enjoying the new space and just embracing the new and different experiences that you're going to be faced with that side. So Duncan says, hi, Busi. How's school teachers opportunities in Canada from Newcastle, South Africa? I'm not in the teaching industry, but the best thing I always say for people who reach out asking about opportunities in teaching specifically is look up different boards, school boards all over Canada. So for example, I'm currently living in the Niagara region in Ontario, and you can look at maybe the District School Board of Niagara, right? The Niagara District School Board, and then have a look at what job openings they have, and then look for other school boards in areas that you might be interested in moving to. Look for open jobs, try and reach out to them just to find out what are the processes, like if they're hiring somebody from outside, what would they want to see from you, and then take things from there. Kongi, how long did your process take from express entry submission to receiving an invitation to apply? The entire process took us around a year and 4 months, but we had a bunch of delays that were beyond our control. So it really could have been a lot quicker. But from express entry submission to receiving our invitation to apply, I think it was less than 3 months. But Tammy, please weigh in if I'm not remembering correctly. But going through our profile, being in the express entry in the pool to actually receiving the invitation, it was not a very long time. Like we didn't have to wait long. Like I think what took us a long time was just getting all of our things in order for us to actually get in the pool and be in that space where we could get that invitation to apply. But getting the actual invitation didn't take a very long time. So Alan says, watching from beautiful British Columbia, keep up the good work. Thank you so much for joining, Alan. Thank you so much for joining. Okay. So let me move on. Okay, so we've gone through the time consuming processes that you can often face, which can be stressful. And we've also gone through having to use or potentially having to use a huge chunk of your savings, which can be a negative because there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of things that you don't know. And the next point that I want us to talk about is the separation from your family and your friends. And this can be a difficult one. If you are moving to a place where you don't know anyone already, you don't have friends there already, you don't have family there already, and you're going to be the only person, I think it's more difficult if you're going to be moving as an individual, but even as a family, you would be the only people you essentially know. So this could lead to feeling homesick, having a feeling of disconnection just from even the environment, the new environment that you are in. And so maintaining those long distance relationships that you will now have with your family and friends, it can require additional effort and even resources. So that is something that is also, it can be a negative. It definitely can be a negative when you are looking at the whole process and entire picture of immigrating. So please do give the video a thumbs up if you are enjoying it. And if there is somebody that you think might benefit from being part of this conversation, please do share the live with them. Okay, so Makosazana is watching from Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you for joining. And then Mary is asking, hi Busi, when you landed, what temporary accommodation did you use when you landed? And with your experience and knowledge now, would you still make the same choice for temporary accommodation? So we used an Airbnb. We booked an Airbnb for a month. And the reason we chose a month was because Airbnb, I don't know if they still do this, but at the time they would give you a discount. Like there was a pretty big discount that you got if you were booking an entire month at a place. So it ended up making more sense than booking 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks. And if we would do it again, I would 100% do it the same way. And I still recommend anyone who asks, I still recommend find temporary accommodation. I haven't used Airbnb in a long time, but I assume that it would still work in a similar way. So I highly do recommend that people use something like Airbnb to book. And then from a time perspective, the month was a good enough time. Like we could have used less of the time, but because of the discount that we got, and if there is still a discount, I would say get the full month. If there isn't a discount anymore and you're going to pay pretty much the same, whether you're booking 2 weeks or 3 weeks, then I would say you potentially could do with a bit less, because I think we were out of that temporary Airbnb in around by the third week point. We could have been completely out, but we just, paced ourselves and did things at a slower pace because we knew we had the entire full month there. So I would definitely do it the same way and still recommend using something like Airbnb. So Spesihle says, once watching from Hendrina, South Africa, Mpumalanga province. Julie is joining from South Africa. And then they're also asking, why did you choose Canada? I am contemplating between Canada and the UK. So when we were looking at, there's a number of factors, and I do have a video on the channel where we spoke about why we left South Africa, and we go into more depth in that video, talking about why we specifically chose chose Canada to move to. And we looked at various things, like we have kids, so looking at the education system this side, looking at healthcare and the costs that would be involved with everything. Like, would we need something like maybe medical aid to access basic healthcare needs? Would we need to pay fees for our kids to go to and get a decent education? And we just looked at a number of things that our family was interested in, and Canada made the most sense for us. The only thing that was not like a very big drawing factor, I'd say, was the weather, because we're from South Africa. We're used to warmer weather most times of the year. So that has taken a bit of adjustment, but we're generally, my husband and I, like my kids, I think they will decide for themselves when they get older, whether they prefer colder weather over hot weather. But we are good with colder weather. We're good with colder weather. It can get a bit tiring at times because it lasts so long, but we've been quite happy with it, and we do prefer like colder weather over hot weather for majority of the time. So Tammy says another negative is no mom kulu gogo malume and to drop the kids off Siyo Jola. That is definitely that's one big one. Because on weekends, I don't even know, like, unless we had plans where we're like, okay, this is what we're doing with the boys. Somebody always wanted the boys like to come over. It's like, bring the boys over. But now we don't have that. It's just, it's us. And yeah, like we don't have that luxury of dropping them off with somebody, or somebody saying, hey, bring the boys over so they can come play the side. So that is definitely one of the downsides when it comes to immigrating and moving. Mary saying, thank you. You are very, very welcome. Okay, so let's move on to the next point, which is adjustment challenges. So, when you are moving to another place, you'll find that emotionally and psychologically, things can get a bit challenging. You'll have to deal with a number of cultural differences. There'll be language barriers potentially, depending on where you are moving. I've heard a number of people who have moved to countries like Germany talk about the language barrier. And even when I think of my own experience moving to the Netherlands when I lived in Amsterdam for a year, yes, they do use English. And when you go to a number of places, people know how to speak English. But when it comes to things like you're finding a place to rent, when I had to sign the lease for my rental place, I had to sign a lease that was written in Dutch. They did give me a version of it that was in English, but on that English version, it specifically stated that should there be any disputes, the Dutch version of that contract is what they are going to use if we'd have to go to court for some reason or another. And when I looked at things like using my online banking, for example, that was also in Dutch. And that's something I do not understand. And I hope they have changed it at this point. But when I was getting on the online banking, I had to literally figure out how do I use this thing, because everything was in Dutch and they didn't have an English version of the website. So depending on the country that you are moving to, you can find that language barriers are not just hitting you when you have to communicate with people. And from things that I've heard from people who've moved to Germany or even went there visiting, you find that there's a lot more people are just not open to even having that conversation and discussion in Germany with you, even if they understand the language. And this is something friends that I came to have when I lived in Amsterdam, who were from Germany, also spoke about. And they said they just don't understand why they behave in that way. Like a number of people will behave in that way because when they go outside of the country, they expect other people to try and be accommodating and meet them halfway. And they will speak English to communicate with other people. So that is one thing that you should just think about and know that you might face depending on the place that you are moving to. And if you would need to learn another language, just plan and know that when I am landing, or even before you get to the place, you've already started learning the language, because you would find it very difficult to integrate with other people from a social perspective. When it's difficult already, it can be difficult already when you already understand the language, but imagine how much more it would be if language is also a big barrier that you have to face. But there's the building a new support system. So as we mentioned, we don't have gogo, mkulu, uncles, aunts, like people, a lot of people around us, and even the friends that you might have. You need to now start building a new support system, which is not easy because you're letting people into your lives essentially, right? And that typically, it takes time. It takes time to build those genuine connections with people, and that you can actually trust people. So that is one of the other negatives and downsides of immigrating. And adjusting to your new environment can also take a lot of time and will require a lot of effort on your part. Because if you're not intentional about it, it may take you much longer than is necessary for you to just adjust to being in the new environment that you are in. And this can cause you potential stress and even a lot more feelings of being isolated. You could feel like you are more isolated. So let me just have a look at the comments. And Zinhle says, hi, Busi, how did your boys adjust to Canadian schooling system? So with my boys, we moved when my oldest was 6 years old and my youngest was 2. So for my 2-year-old, he doesn't know any other schooling system than the Canadian one, because even in South Africa, we hadn't even taken him to preschool or a creche. He was still at home. If he wasn't with us, he was with the grandparents or one of my brothers or our aunts or uncles. Like he was with somebody like in the family. So for him, he's only known the Canadian schooling system. My 6-year-old, when we left, he had just completed grade R. So you can imagine how young he was as well. He had completed grade R and he was supposed to start grade 1 in South Africa that January that we moved. And when we got to Canada, because schools here start in September, they had already begun with school. It had been a couple of months, right, of grade 1. So he needed to jump in the middle of grade 1, but they take him through when you are registering your kids, and I don't know if this is the same across all the district school boards, but I would assume it is, but they had him go through different assessments, and that's where they said, okay, they think he is okay to join while grade 1 is already in taking place, and he got extra support just to help him with catching up, and we also were helping him at home. But for him as well, he didn't come in at a very late stage, so there wasn't much adjustment or difference in the way that things were done this side that I noticed in any case, or things that he's even struggled with. So my boys were quite young, and I think that might be a bit different for people who are kids who are a little bit older. So I hope that answers your question. And I'll see at some point, maybe if I meet a family who would be open to having a conversation, who came with kids who are a little bit older, just to hear from their perspective what they found different. And I think one of the biggest things, if I think about it, it might be making friends maybe for older kids, because the older we get, like younger kids make friends so easily. You go to the park with your kids and they're already playing with 5 other people, or kids rather, calling them their friends. And as you get older, we start typically to like close, a lot more close. So I think that's where one of the biggest challenges might be for older kids. So Konyi says, would you say that the immigration pool is now congested because my profile from last year expired? I had to resubmit this year and I only have 1 more year before ours expires. So right now, I would say yes and no at the same time. And the yes, it's congested, is primarily, I think, still because of the pandemic. So you remember when COVID hit, things came to a halt and they were not sending out any invitations. So people kept coming into the pool in large numbers. And by the time they started sending out those invitations, the pool was a lot more competitive. And the scores were in the 500s, from what I remember, of people who were actually receiving invitations. And then 500s of, yeah, 500s, they were in the 500s. And then they started kind of coming down like as the months kept progressing. But I honestly still think that it's the effects of that long period during the pandemic where people were just not receiving their invitations. And that is the reason why it's taking that much longer. It's a lot more competitive, number one, and then there were a lot more people who ended up being in the pool. And you probably know that that's how they judge who's getting an invitation or not. Not really judge, maybe judge is not the right word, but when it comes to the point system, and just please let me know if you lose me at some point, because the headphones I chose to wear today, they're not trying to stick in my ear, so I wouldn't hear myself, like, to if you're not hearing me through this mic anymore. So just please let me know if at any point you do lose audio, because I'm not gonna keep fiddling with them. So yeah, from an IELTS congestion perspective, I think it's still related to the pandemic. It's still related to the pandemic, and then the competitiveness of everything. So every single year there's new people who want to come to Canada, and it gets a lot more competitive, because one of the things that I've noticed, which do count when you're looking at the number of points that you can get, is things like having a postgraduate degree. So maybe you do your master's, for example. There's so many countries where doing your master's is just, it's standard. It's like, yeah, you went to university, you're gonna get your master's and finish it. But when I look at South Africa, which is where I'm from, doing your master's or completing your master's, it's like an extra thing that a lot of people do, or doing any type of postgraduate studies, even if it's getting your honors. It's an extra thing that you're doing, and it's like, cherry on top, you went the extra mile. But in a lot of countries, it's the standard. It's like, yeah, everyone, not everyone, but people who do go to university, it's just standard that you're going to have a master's. So you're dealing with people who in the pool who will have that. Some people will even go as far as learning a second language. So for example, here in Canada, English and French are the main languages that are spoken. So if you are somebody who wants to come to Canada, you could be differentiating yourself by learning French. And I know a number of people who have told me they are taking French lessons just to help improve their scores. So it's a mix of those two, that people are very competitive in trying to get their points as high as they can, and that drives up the overall score. And then there's that backlog from the pandemic that we are still faced with. Okay. And then Basil says, when you go to Quebec, you may find similar issues with language as Netherlands and Germany. That is very true. That is very, very true. There's a town we went to in the direction of going to Quebec. We didn't quite make it to Quebec yet. And if you remember where this was, Tammy, please comment below so I can share where this place was. But we noticed that the stop signs, like on the road, they were written in French. We were just like, we're not in Quebec yet. Like we're in the regions, of going in that direction. Like, but at the time before we bought a house, like we did a lot of town tours, just checking out different towns, trying to decide where we'd want to actually settle. And that's where we came across this place. And for me, it was a bit shocking. I'm like, even stop signs are written in French. And the only way you knew it was a stop sign is because the shape of the stop sign still looks like a stop sign. So yeah, definitely, even in Canada, just be sure that if you are not a French speaking person and you don't want to go into a space where you have to be learning a new language, just pick the province that you are moving to very carefully, because yeah, you might find yourself being faced with barriers that you didn't even think about. So Nombuso says, no, I'm not there yet, but I have done my research. UK changes its law all the time to be safe. Just go to Canada. It is very easy, the process there. Okay. So there's some tips from somebody who is like doing research on like the UK and Canada. I never really went into going into the process of living in the UK extensively. So, okay. And then Tammy says, one other negative is that kids lose home language. Both boys were fluent in Xhosa and Zulu and now only respond in English. That's very true. That is very true. And it's one of those things where they can understand. Like my oldest understands a lot more because like he moved when he was 6, and we speak to them in English like at home. So we will, and I have a couple of videos I know even on TikTok where people were like, oh my gosh, like they respond when you speak to them in Zulu, meaning they understand. So we can speak to them, and we speak to them in isiZulu, but they will respond in English. Like they're more comfortable responding in English. They'll try words here and there, but I think that is also definitely another downside when you are moving. It's that the kids likely, and especially if you're moving with them very young, because my youngest, he was 2, he spoke Xhosa because my dad speaks Xhosa, so that's where he got exposed to Xhosa a lot. And he spoke Xhosa and he spoke Zulu with my husband's side of the family and my mother. But now he just speaks English, and we do speak to them in isiZulu, and he will understand things. Both of them understand things, but that is definitely another downside. But I do hope that as they get older, they develop an interest like in learning the language themselves. Because when I think about my own experience, even living in South Africa, I didn't learn how to read and write isiZulu through school. I taught myself. So my parents got an English and Zulu dictionary, and that's where I would sit and I would read for them. And they would correct me in ways that I would pronounce words wrong. And I got to learn and understand how you pronounce different words when you're reading them, because speaking a language and actually reading it is very different, right? So I think it's one of those things. I hope at some point they will develop that interest themselves, because if they're not interested in learning it, it's going to be very difficult, right? But we already have those dictionaries here at home, just so we are ready to go when they get to a point where they're like, oh, okay, I'd like to learn maybe how to read and write in either of the languages that we have in South Africa. So IELTS is an English test. It's an English test. I forget what the actual letters stand for, but they stand for something. And you could just go to Google and search what is IELTS on there. It's going to tell you what the actual words stand for, but it's an English test that you have to take to prove and show the government of Canada that you are proficient in the language and you can communicate in it, you can write in it, and you wouldn't be coming to the country and you can't speak any of the official languages that they have. So it's either when you're coming to Canada, you have to prove that you can speak English or can communicate effectively in either English or French. And for the English test, IELTS is what you would be taking. And you go to the British Council's website. That's where we went to book our exam. And you can also find a lot of resources that can help you with preparing for that exam. So Spesihle says, do you think putting my daughter, who will be in grade 1 next year, in an English medium school will help her adjust better? We were planning to move to Australia. Who will be in grade 1 next year? So the thing with kids that I will say, they catch on so quickly. Like it was not a hassle or a stress like with my youngest when he moved, because my youngest, when he was 2, he did not speak any English. Like, he didn't know any English. We weren't at a point where we were thinking, oh, he needs to start learning English. I think only when we knew that, okay, we're going to be moving by this date, we started introducing very basic things like greeting, saying what his name is, so when you're asking him what his name is, he knows how to respond and what you're asking him. Being able to say when he needs to go use the bathroom, because he was potty trained at that time, and he could tell you if he needed to do number 1 or number 2. But he did it in isiZulu or Xhosa, because he also like mixed the languages at times. But I wouldn't say I don't think you necessarily need to go and put them in a school if they're going to be starting grade R next year, just because kids catch on quickly. But if you think it's something that you can do and it's not going to be putting any strain on you in any way, then go for it for sure. I think anything that you can do to help them fast track their way is going to be a lot better. But for us, with our 2-year-old, he didn't know any English when we moved. We started him with the basics of, my name, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I need to use the bathroom. And that was it. Like, you can get to he can go through his day, just being able to communicate very basic things, but he caught on very, very quickly. And I think that's just the nice thing with kids. They can catch on pretty quickly. Thank you so much, Kongi. So this is what IELTS stands for. It's International English Language Test System. Thank you very much. Mary also shared it as well. So Nolly says, just booked the IELTS test yesterday. It was a pleasantly easy process. Crossing fingers all will go well on the days of the test. It's pretty straightforward for sure. And resources at the time we were moving that we watched a lot of YouTube videos, because there's people who go in depth in helping you prepare and also just helping you understand that format of the tests. So definitely use the resources that are on the British Council's website, do the tests, like watch videos of people breaking down what each test looks like. Because if you know what the format is going to be, you're going to be a lot more prepared for it. And practice, 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 practice. And when you're doing your speaking test, like elaborate on the answers that you give, because it definitely helps and makes a difference. Okay, so let's carry on with the potential negative aspects that can come with immigrating. And one of those is uncertainty and risk, right? So when you are moving, you're making this big move, you've spent so much time and money, and still there is a lot of uncertainty and risk that is ahead of you, because there's not a lot of things that can be guaranteed in this entire process, right? You're stepping into the unknown. There'll be uncertainties when it comes to job prospects, social integration, and just the overall success in the new environment. So you might also find yourself in a space where you're facing financial risks. Maybe you haven't looked at the cost of living properly in the place that you're going to. I have a video on the channel, which I have linked in the description for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, where I'm going through the cost of living in the top 4 provinces that immigrants tend to move to here in Canada. And that can just help give you an example, an idea of what you can expect depending on where you're moving. And if you would be moving to other countries, I highly recommend that you just go through the process of checking, okay, can I find places that are for rental, even places that are for sale, so you know how much do places cost in general, even if you're not planning to purchase a place right when you land. But just have a look and know and have an idea of how much you could potentially look to spend. And then there's also potential economic downturns where the economy of the country you're moving to could become unstable. There could be industry specific risks where maybe a certain sector, because of economic downturns, it gets impacted. If you work maybe in real estate or you're in manufacturing, there's certain things that can be happening at different times that can impact the the economy of the country that you're moving to. And then you will find that that could lead to increased competition. So if there's an economic downturn, this can often lead to unemployment. Like, I was laid off a bit earlier this year. And because of that, I'm not the only one who was affected. There's a number of people who have lost their jobs in the tech sector specifically. And you find that there is going to be a lot more competition in the market because there's a lot more people who are out of their job. So it's very important to just consider the long-term economic resilience of your chosen destination. So just have a look at what has happened in the past. Not to say what's happened in the past is the exact same thing that's going to happen in the future, but it can give you an idea of what you could potentially be faced with. And you can then start planning accordingly, where you know you maybe have enough savings to see you through, say, 6 months or a year if something would happen and you lose your job, because you could move today, you have a job, a month later, that company says, sorry, we have to let you go, and then what if something like that happens? So it's also important to just make sure you are building a strong professional network as you're going through the process of moving, you're developing versatile skills, and you're staying updated on economic news and any policies that can help you navigate and adapt to any economic changes that may arise. And if you are somebody like me who does not like, I'm not much of a news watching person, but I have time to update me on a lot of things that show up. So let me have a look at the comments to see if we have anything that came in before we move to the potential positive aspects of immigrating. So Julie says, thank you so much, Busi. So I am a nurse, and there's so much uncertainty and risk involved. There definitely is. But if you prepare, because I think that is something that is in our control, right? There's so many things that we can't control, and the risks that come with it, they can happen at any point. And they can happen even if you don't move. Something like losing your job, you might not have immigrated anyway, but you could still lose your job. I think the only biggest difference is what you have around you as somebody who's immigrated versus somebody who hasn't. So, for example, if you're still living in the same country, you're close to maybe your parents' house, if you do have people that you can move back in with, you lose your job, you could be thinking, my plan B is to go live with my parents. Like, I'll move out of this place and go live with my parents. But if you don't have that, like us, where we're in a country where we don't have our parents close by and we can just say, okay, we're going to pack up and go to live with them, we have to make alternative plans to make sure that we are securing ourselves as much as we possibly can, as much as we possibly can. And another thing that I want to just put out there for anyone who's thinking of moving, because I've seen people on some of the TikTok videos that I'll share who will say things like, oh, all of you can leave, maybe run away from South Africa, but you will be back. Like, you will be back, you will see. My question to that is always, so what? So what if people come back? It's home. Home is home. Like, if there are things and you are moving because there's things that you see are not quite working for you, it is okay for you to come back. And you pointing out that there's things not working out in a particular space does not mean you now do not like or love that space, but you are realizing and recognizing that there's certain things that are not working for you in that place, but there are other places where you might not have to face the same challenges that you have to face in that space. So if there is that, that runs through your head from time to time, where you think, what if I end up getting to a point where I have to go back home? It's still home. It is still home. Like, I don't think that is something you should look at in a negative way. You went out there, you tried different things out, you've experienced a different way of life. You are going to be a changed person when you come back. And the way that you will look at things around you, you might even start seeing that you will pick up on opportunities that people who are in that area might not be able to clearly see because they've been in that space for so long, which is why I think immigrants moving to other places very easily see opportunities that are right there in front of everyone, but other people don't tend to see them as easily. So Bullx Trader says, if I want to move to Canada for work permanently, what's better? Look for a job, then immigrate, or immigrate, then look for a job? I honestly say try both. Try both. If you can find a job before you move, that is definitely amazing and great. And I would pick that option over moving without a job and then looking for one any day. I would pick that option first. But if that is not working, where I'm looking for the work, but I'm not finding it, I would prepare, like having the funds to say, okay, when I move, I will be able to settle and then give myself a certain amount of time to look for work. I will do that option as well. So when you look at my situation with Tammy, both of us moved without a job, but not because we weren't looking and we just thought we don't want to move without a job, but it's just more difficult. It's not impossible, because I know of a number of people and I've heard a number of people who moved with jobs already, so it's definitely possible, but it just doesn't seem to work out for a larger amount of people. So you may find that you are struggling to find a job before you've moved, but after you move, your situation maybe is similar to ours, where it takes you 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks to find your first job. I found my first job in Canada in less than 2 weeks. And with my husband, I think it was the third week, but we were both within 1 month. And there will be people who will move and they take 4 months or even a lot longer to find work. But if your aim is moving, and this is where I always say you need to get clear on why you want to move. Why do you want to make this move? And that will inform whether moving with a job or without a job makes the most sense for you. Because if you are only moving, say maybe you just want to work, you're not looking to stay there and build your life over a long-term period, and you just want to go work somewhere else and quickly go back home, then it might not make that much sense for you to say I'm going to move without a job. And it still could, but I just think you should be open, try both ways out, and then whatever works out the quickest for you and still makes sense for your current circumstances, go for that. But if you can find a job beforehand, that is, I think, number one. But if you don't, then yeah, you can still look for jobs. You can look for jobs after you moved. So Mary says, when you are laid off, what are the opportunities if part-time jobs? Are you saying, like, are there part-time jobs that you can look for? If you're laid off, I think you go through the same process of looking for a job if you're looking for a job in that same sector that you're in. So you'll still go through the same process of looking for the job, however you found the initial job that you had that you lost. If you are by part-time jobs, like, are you asking if there's maybe other work in different industries that you could look into? And if that's the question, here in Canada, the answer is yes. And the reason I say that is because in the retail space, for example, there is always companies that are looking for people, that are hiring, that always have the "we are hiring" signs on their doors. So I don't think you would ever go with absolutely nothing that you are able to do to bring money in a country like Canada. And somebody else might have a different opinion or thought about this, but I do not think that if you are somebody who knows what you came here for, that you will sit and not have anything that you are able to do to bring money in. And I say this purely because there are always companies that are looking for people. It just might not be in the pay bracket that you are used to getting if you're a certain professional who has certain skills, but you have a lot of options. You have a lot of options. So when you are laid off, what are the opportunities of doing part-time jobs or other low-end jobs? Yeah, so that's basically what I was answering. There's a lot of opportunities in that low-end job space. So if it's taking too long to find that specific type of job that you are looking to move through, then you do have other options. And that's the point we discussed when I was talking about losing my job and how you can prepare yourself and what the negative aspects of moving as an immigrant and then losing your job could be. And one of those was, from a career trajectory perspective, it can potentially slow down if you have to now move outside of your profession and go do something else because you need to make ends meet, right? But one of the ways that I shared you could mitigate for that risk was just making sure that as you are working, you are building up an emergency fund. So you are saving enough money for you to be able to stay without that job and actually look for something else. So you don't feel super pressured to go into something that's not aligned with what you want to do. But at the same time, if you are and you find yourself in that situation where you don't have that emergency fund or the savings that can see you take the time to find work that's aligned with the job that you want to do and the career that you're trying to build, then go for it, because you are essentially looking for ways the way you can be able to pay your bills and keep your life moving. So there's a lot of opportunities here in Canada, especially in that low end side of things. So Delhi says, is education cheaper that side? I so hear that some tertiary institutions offer free tuition. I have not heard of institutions that offer free tuition in Canada. I know in Europe, I think it's in Germany, where there are universities and institutions where you wouldn't have to pay any fees to go to. It might be the case here in Canada. That is something I would definitely need to either find somebody who knows more about it or just look up information and find info on it. But as far as I know, you have to pay for institutions, higher education institutions. What is free is the public schooling system. So primary school, high school, you wouldn't have to pay for your child to go to a public school this side. So Ntlantla says, is it true that welding jobs are plenty and plumbing jobs also? So these are the fields that have there's a shortage of people who have these skills and who want to go into these lines of work. So they are. And I remember when we stayed, it's when we still lived in the greater Toronto area. There's an area that we drove to. Again, if Tammy, you remember where this was, but there was a company that had a big board outside and they were looking for welders specifically. And they even had a thing on there saying if you are able to find them welders, they can pay you a certain amount for that referral. Like if you find them someone and they're able to hire that person. So there are a lot of skills that are in demand. And I think those are also the jobs where you might find it's a bit easier to a certain extent to find a job before you move, where there's an employer maybe who's done the the impact assessment test and the labor impact assessment test, and then they can give a job offer to somebody who is outside of the country because they can show that it's difficult for us to find people who are on in the country already having the skill. So with that, I would say maybe look at the job bank for here in Canada specifically. Look at job bank and try and search for welding type of jobs or plumbing type of jobs. See which companies are looking for those types of people, and then start connecting with the people who are in those companies. And you might find yourself getting a job that actually works for you. Okay, so let's move on to the potential positive aspects of immigrating. And one of the biggest things that you may find is economic opportunities, right? So you might find that you have access to better jobs, better job prospects, which can lead to an improved living standard and financial stability and career growth. So when I looked at the unemployment rates, so in South Africa, I found the unemployment rate for Q1 in South Africa, and that was recorded at 32.9%, right? And the unemployment rate in Canada right now is currently 5.2%. And this is as of May 2023. So as of last month, the unemployment rate in Canada is 5.2. So just from that number, you can already see that your chances of being able to find work are going to be a lot higher than if you are in a country like South Africa, where that unemployment rate is sitting at 32.9%. One of the other things that you can look forward to if you are immigrating is an improved quality of life, where from a healthcare perspective, education perspective, safety perspective, infrastructure, and just the overall well-being is a lot higher than what you are used to. I have a video on the channel where I had a conversation with the Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addictions here in Ontario. This was back in 2020, right after the pandemic started. And I was actually quite surprised when I first met him and I found out that Ontario has an entire associate minister of mental health and addictions. Because when I lived in South Africa, I used to volunteer at an organization that helped people with their mental health. And this organization, there's so many people, including myself, before I started volunteering there. I used to think it was a government initiative. It's an initiative that was started by the government to help the people of South Africa with mental health challenges. And it wasn't the case. It was an organization that the government will fund from time to time. And that's why you will see the government's logo on some of their content or on their website. And you will see that you have that government's website logo on there, along with other people who are donors and who will sponsor and fund certain initiatives. But the government in South Africa, when it comes to mental health and actually looking at spending money specifically for it, the budget is just it's not there. It's not there. Like I remember looking at the stats, and there were provinces in South Africa where mental health was not even it wasn't even mentioned in the document that I was looking in certain provinces. And in other provinces it's mentioned, but it was kind of just lumped in there along with like health in general. But if you're coming to a country like Canada, they are looking at it as something that is, a lot more important. And from a safety perspective, if you're following me on other platforms, and if you're not, do follow me and have a look at in my Instagram and TikTok. I have my handle at the bottom of the screen right there. But I've shared how it looks outside and in the neighborhoods that we live in and other areas when we're driving. People just generally don't have fences around their house. There's no need to have a fence around your house. And that's where we talk about the safety aspect of things and say safety is a lot higher. And when you're living in a country like South Africa, you may find that you have to spend a lot of time, a lot of even your mental capacity, like you're thinking about safety all the time. We don't have any burglar bars on our windows. You can literally walk from the street to our front door, and that's it. So from a quality of life perspective, if you are looking at immigrating, that is one of the things that you could be looking forward to. You can also find that you have a lot more cultural enrichment where you're getting exposed to new cultures, new traditions, new languages, just meeting people from different walks of life. And that can help expand your own horizons and just foster a greater understanding of and appreciation of diversity. Okay, so Tammy says, look up Hamilton for welding jobs. There's plenty welding jobs there. Okay. Hamilton is definitely one of those. It's one of those places where I do see there being a lot more opportunities. Just when you look at the way that the place is. So I'd say go to places like Job Bank, and then specifically when you're searching on there, search maybe for Hamilton, and then also just go on the web and look specifically for welding jobs in Hamilton, in Ontario, and see what comes up. Okay, so Sibabalwe says, hello, Busi, watching from Cape Town. Thank you for joining. Sibabalwe and says, how friendly is Canada to immigrants and their kids? From our experience, Canada has been it's been a very friendly country to people who are coming from the outside. We moved with two of our kids. We lived in the Greater Toronto area for around 3 years or a bit over 3 years. And then we moved to the Niagara region. And the reason I'm mentioning these two places is because in the Greater Toronto area, you're going to find a slightly higher number of visible minorities, right? So non-white people. But when you're moving to the smaller towns in Canada, different parts of Canada, that's where you'll find a lot less of the visible minorities. And there's a lot of people who think that, oh, maybe you might be faced with a lot more discrimination if you are moving to a place where there isn't that many visible minorities, but it hasn't been our experience. So we've lived in the Greater Toronto area, which has a lot more diversity than where we currently live, where you do still see visible minorities, but they're not as much. But our experience in both places, and I also would say that I feel like people are a lot more friendlier and open in the Niagara region, like where we currently live, where we moved to. Like we speak to neighbors a lot more here than we did when we lived in the greater Toronto area, which was in a place where you could see that a lot of the people living here are people from outside of Canada, right? People who came as immigrants, probably, or maybe their parents came in as immigrants and now they are in a position where they are getting their own places. But it's been quite friendly. Like it's a place that really welcomes people, and as much as people can still experience certain discriminations just depending on where they are, and because there's people coming from all over the place that you will come across, and people are not the same, right? You can still definitely experience that. I don't think there's a country in this world where there will be zero discrimination of people who are coming from other places. But Canada has been very friendly to us. It's been very, very friendly to us. Bullets Trader, any IT job advice? In what sense? Like finding a job or moving into the IT space? Can you get more specific, like on what you're asking? But if it's just finding a job in general, I would highly recommend, and this is not just for people who are in IT, but if you are looking to find a job outside of the country that you are living in right now, I think it's very important to make sure that you have a very strong online presence. I think your online presence is going to speak volumes versus somebody who doesn't have that online presence. Okay, so in finding a job, yeah, I think that's one of the things. Like, it's just make sure that you are having a professional online presence, because employers are looking when the employers are looking for you, they'll look for you online, right? If they are finding your resume, maybe you've applied for a job, best believe they will be trying to find you on another platform like LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is one of those platforms that is still very much relevant, that employers use. So if you have a LinkedIn that does not match what your resume looks like, I have heard employers say they chuck those applications out. And this was, I was part of a program where, or a workshop rather, like a brainstorming session, where they were building a program to try and make it easier for employers who are in Canada looking for people who have the skills they need outside of Canada, just looking at how they can make this an easier and smoother process for everyone, both the people looking for a job and the people hiring for a job. And the people who are hiring for a job, because in that session, there were people who were employers. A lot of employers shared that they sometimes will receive resumes, and when they look at the resumes, they're thinking, oh, this person looks like, they fit all the things that they are looking for, and they will go look at the person's LinkedIn profile, and it just does not look like it belongs to the same person. And they basically said they don't have the time, because of the number of applications that they also receive. They just don't have the time to try figure out whether what's on your resume is legit. Because if you can't put the stuff on a platform like LinkedIn, how do they know that you're not lying about whatever you've put on your resume? So that would be one of the biggest things that I can tell you. And I can also say, from what I have seen, people who are outside of certain countries on the African continent, they take their LinkedIn profiles and professional online presence very seriously. There's a number of people whose LinkedIn profiles I've audited who are based in the US and even in Canada, and people are going all out on the LinkedIn profiles. And then I will have a look at a number of profiles from people who are based on the African continent. And I will specifically say in South Africa, because there are people in other African countries who are doing the thing, and they are utilizing this platform the most. And I do think that is why you find some people getting a lot more luck or success, like luck, because luck falls onto the person who is the most prepared, right? So if you have a LinkedIn profile, but you just created the profile, never really did anything with it, maybe your profile picture is not even a professional looking profile picture, and you just thought, well, I have a LinkedIn profile, but it's not working. What is actually on your LinkedIn profile? And is your LinkedIn profile complementary to what is on your resume if an employer is finding that? So that is a very long-winded way to say, if you're looking to find a job abroad, I think it's very, very important for you to make sure that you have an online presence. And when I worked in South Africa, I think this will be the last point, and then I'll move on because we're already at an hour, but I am absolutely enjoying the conversation. And please do keep your questions coming. when I still lived in South Africa. So when I was in university, I finished university, and doing my honors, I was working part-time. I was part of a program which was sponsored, and I was sponsored in that program by a company that I ended up working for. This was a company that has its headquarters in the US. And when I finished my studies, I managed to secure a job at this company. And that's how I got to go and live and work in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. And when I came back to South Africa, working in South Africa, they were trying to find more graduates for this program, right? And they came to us, they'll come to us and they'll ask, where can we find people? We are struggling to find people to get into this program so they can, become people who work for our company as well. And when we would ask them where they are looking for people, and this is looking for graduates, it's not looking for people who have experience already. Guess where they were looking for people? On LinkedIn. How many students are actively creating LinkedIn profiles that are actually geared at helping them find opportunities? And I remember when I was still in university, I think I'm just one of those people who will jump on new things, and I'll see the thing and I'll test it out, just see how it's going. I was one of the people who had a LinkedIn profile even when I was in university, and a lot of my peers, friends included, some friends, when I would say, "Oh, you need to get on LinkedIn," they would just say, "What's the point? I don't have a job yet. I'm still a student. I'll get on LinkedIn when I have a job." But employers, if you do have people who are still in school studying in your lives, tell them to get on LinkedIn. And what they will put on there is what they are currently studying. They are studying something, they are working on projects. When employers are looking for graduates, a lot of them who are outside and looking for people all over the world, they will find you on the internet. Like, it's just one of those things that I cannot stress enough how important it is, to make sure that you are putting yourself out there and making your profile look really, really good. So Peter says, "Hi there, Busi. Peter here. I'm currently a test analyst here in SA. Do you think there are possibilities to find a job currently?" The best place, because I'm not somebody who is aware of what's happening in every single industry. It's look up the companies and the job titles that you want to get into. Go on platforms like LinkedIn and Indeed and see what's out there, and that is going to help inform you whether there are opportunities or there aren't any opportunities. So Lualuhle says, "Hi Busi, in terms of cultural diversity and interaction with one another, because in SA we are very separate. Just diversity and interaction. I can't say I'm quite understanding your question, Lualuhle. Like, are you asking if there is a lot of interaction with other people? And if that is the question, then I will say yes, there is. But the caveat to that is you have to be intentional about it. Like, no one is just maybe going to come to your apartment and knock on your door and be like, "Hey, I'm looking for friends," or "You want to hang out," or, do a particular thing. Because I think you would also find that creepy. You would find that weird and creepy. But if you are intentional and you're going out, maybe if you have kids, for example, you can go to the park and you're getting to you get to meet other parents that take their kids to the park. If there's events at the kids' school, you're going to those events. Even events in your own community, there's always things, especially around the summertime. I find there's so many things that happen. And if you are somebody who maybe doesn't have kids, just be aware of what's happening in your environment and put yourself in those situations where you are out there, where you can potentially meet people. And people generally are will talk. There are people you will meet who will talk to you, and you get to know new people. One of the biggest places, and I think this was because that's where I spent a lot of my time, but got to meet a lot of people that I've kept along the years since moving to Canada through work. So if you are maybe somebody who doesn't have kids, but you're going to end up in the workspace, just be mindful of that you will meet a lot of people that you work with, and not every single person is going to be someone that you keep as someone you will continue knowing, even maybe after you work at a particular place. But there is a lot of opportunity to engage with people. And I also don't know if it's the fact that there's a lot of immigrants who come in the country, But there's people who I'm friends with who are born in Canada, but their parents maybe moved as immigrants, or their grandparents moved as immigrants. And I just find that you will meet a lot of people who understand, some of the challenges that you might face, and it just makes things a bit different. So Neo says, hi, Busi, just joined now. Thank you for joining, Neo. So one quick question. Do you plan on living in Canada indefinitely? Currently, we don't really have any plans to move anywhere. But I always say, the world is my oyster. I am not confined to one particular place. I would not ever want to be. So if there would ever be an opportunity to move somewhere else, and it makes sense, and it's something that I look forward to and want to experience, I definitely am somebody who would take that experience up and go for it. At this particular moment, though, I would say I am planning to stay in Canada. I have no plans currently to leave. But if next month you hear me say, I'm moving to the US, just as an example, don't be like, Busi, you said you would never move. Like, I am an open person, and I don't believe that we should be confined to one particular place. I think there's so many experiences and different ways of living and ways that you could enrich your life just by moving. It takes a lot, it takes a lot. And that's part of the reason why I say, for now, I just need to take a breath. Like, moving to Canada was a big move. And even going through living in different places from a renting perspective till the point where we got our house, it's all just been a lot. And I'm just, still just enjoying where I currently am. But who knows what the future might hold. Okay, so I will come back to the comments, but let's just go through the points quickly, so we make sure that we are going through every single thing to help us answer this question on whether or not immigrating is worth it. So from a potential positive aspects of immigrating, one of the things that you can also look forward to is personal and professional development. When you are relocating to another country, it's going to require adaptability. It's going to require resilience. It's going to require acquiring new skills. And there's a lot of things that you are learning just going through the process, coming to live in a new place, that you don't even consciously realize that you are learning and you are developing from both a personal and professional level. Maybe the professional side of things might be a bit more obvious because you might be doing things and you're seeing that, oh, this is what I'm doing. But I find that from a personal perspective, there's so many things that you are so many muscles that you're working, in your own life, that are going to help you in different aspects when it comes to what you gain or can gain from personal development. And then the experience of navigating a different society and work environment, it can enhance your personal and professional development, and also foster independence and confidence. So just think about anything that you have ever done that it was outside of your comfort zone. You didn't quite know how it's going to work out, but you really wanted to try it out, and you try that thing out, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, you find that you have learned something. You learn a lot, and that value that comes from what you have learned is going to be very big in the next thing that you're going to do. And if you do try the thing out and it works out, it also helps build your confidence, and you see that I can do a lot of things that I put my mind to, which gives you the confidence to go on and do even more things. So when it comes to answering whether immigrating is worth it or not, that decision to immigrate, it will ultimately depend on an individual's personal circumstances. What are your aspirations? What are your priorities? What are your risks for appetite? As I mentioned a bit earlier, for anyone who joined after I said this, but I've personally lived in Europe for a year as a permanent resident. I then moved back to South Africa and moved to Canada as a permanent resident, where I've lived for over 4 years now with my family. And we recently became Canadian citizens. And for my family and I, it has been worth every single thing that we've gone through to this point, both good and bad. And nothing is guaranteed, essentially. And because nothing is guaranteed in life, like if you want to do something, it is very important that you thoroughly research and evaluate what the benefits you might get are with doing a particular thing, like immigrating, and also look at what the challenges of moving to another country are before you make that big decision, and answer based on your personal circumstances and aspirations, your priorities, and your appetite for risk, whether immigrating is worth it or not. Because we've spent a bit over an hour now, talking through a number of different things. And you can see that there is so many things that can happen, so many things that are a risk that could potentially go wrong, as we speak about what wrong might look like. And there's also a lot of things that might go right, but depending on what you're looking to get out of the whole situation, I think considering your long-term goal is a very big part of this journey. And from my experience, it can greatly help inform like this decision, whether taking it makes sense or not for you, because there will be challenges. And if you don't know why you're doing this, it can be very easy for you to just say, you know what, I'm just going to carry on doing what I am doing because maybe it's working for me or not. And one of the things that I wanted to share, just as a this is how life typically tends to go, and it's not a very linear experience, is that when you look at life, so this is it's a screenshot, or a picture rather, that I took from a book that I was reading, and the book is called The Code of the Extraordinary Mind. And it was just showing how life tends to go, right? So when we go through life, we might think that life is supposed to go in a very linear direction where you keep growing, a lot of things keep happening and it's just going on an upward trajectory. When in reality, this is what we usually face when you think about things that happen in life. And depending on how old you are, you might be able to look back at your own life and say, yeah, like, I've went through things and things were good, but I had a dip where things were just not working out the way that I was expecting or even wanted them to work out. But they started looking up again, and it was pretty good. And then something else happened, and when you look at, when I saw this and I was reading the book, I thought this is reminding me of the it's reminding me of the stock market. If you're somebody who purchases stocks, it can get rough, like where things go down and you're thinking, oh, maybe I shouldn't have bought into this thing, like should I be like selling while it's going, like there's a lot that can go on. But if you zoom out, stock market and your life in general, so when you look at this drawing over here, if you zoom out and you look at the bigger picture, you will see that as much as there are dips, the trajectory essentially generally is still going up. But it's part of life for there to be things that are not going to work out as you think that they should or you would like them to. And the thing that ends up making the most sense is for you to plan that things will go bad. How am I going to react if things happen that I have not that I would not like to happen? Because it would be great if everything in life just kept going up and up and up. So I hope that also just helps give you a bit of perspective when you're thinking about things and you're thinking about moving, that things are not always going to be perfect. They're not always going to be perfect. But if you have that bigger picture in mind and you think about life in this way, you'll realize that, there's a lot that can happen that's like, taking me on a downward turn. But in the grand scheme of things, things are always working out for my good. They are always working out for my good. So Bolex Trader saying, Yabonga, you are very much welcome. Nessie is watching from Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you so much for joining, Nessie. And then Sergo says, hey, Busi, did your kids have to take the citizenship test or did they get it automatically because of you and your husband? If one comes without the kids and you take citizenship, do your kids get it? So our kids did not have to take the citizenship test. Only people who are above 18 have to take the citizenship test. So if you are moving with children, they have to be above 18 for them to have to take the citizenship test. So our kids only needed to fulfill the requirements of like presently being in Canada, like living in Canada. So, for example, if you actually, I just need to double check this. Like, did we have to submit? I think we had to submit like a presence test for them as well. I think that was one of the main things that they had to do. Yeah, they have to be physically present in Canada for the 1,000 plus days. Like it works out to around 3 years being in Canada. But if you come to Canada, you live in Canada, you become a citizen, and then your child is outside of Canada, I actually am not 100% sure if you can just sponsor your kid to come and they automatically become a citizen, or they would have to wait that period. But they don't have, our kids didn't have to write the test. So I think that would be something I say, go to canada.ca, which is the government's website, like where I usually, will say a lot of info that you're looking for is going to be on there, and just specifically have a look at a Canadian citizen sponsoring their own child to come. Like, I know you can definitely come and sponsor your child to come and live and be a permanent resident if you are a permanent resident, for example. But if you're a Canadian already, I'm not 100% sure if they come in and just become Canadian citizens, or they first have to become permanent residents, fulfill certain requirements like the presence test, and then they would be able to become citizens afterwards. Like, it might work out in that way, but that's something I would just say, have a look at canada.ca to make sure that you are getting to it, getting to understand how that works. So Zintle says, hi, Busi, watching from Santon. I'm a bit concerned as a mother, which is the best city to move? Is that is to move that is less congested and homely in Canada? Honestly, from what I've seen, it does definitely depend on what your preferences are. Some people don't like that small town feel where things are just a bit slower and less busy. Some people like being in places that have a lot more people. But from when you think about moving with kids, either honestly could work. I think it just depends on what you prefer as a family in terms of how you're living. So you could move to a busy place, you're still going to experience the safety that the country in general has, but also just bear in mind that different cities will have different levels of crime, because crime does still exist, right? It just might not be at the magnitude that it's at in other countries, but it will depend. And the more people you have in certain areas, and also people maybe, so for example, when I look at Toronto, that's one place where I have seen a lot of homeless people, like people who will be sleeping in the street. And that's where you tend to find and hear that there is a lot more crime, right? There will be higher crimes, which is still not at the level that it's at in other outside other countries. But you have to weigh your options and see what is your preference. Do you prefer being in a place that has a lot going on, is very busy, or you would not mind like a more smaller town and look into small towns that exist? Because Canada and Ontario specifically, as just one province, it's very huge. So I don't have a particular place where I can say, oh, this is the place that maybe makes the most sense for you to move with kids, or somewhere else might make the most sense. But I generally think there's you probably wouldn't be going wrong with a lot of places. It's just nuanced in depending on what your personal preferences are. So Tammy says positives: free education plus no school uniform. You really like the no school uniform thing. Sometimes I'm like, is school uniform really a bad thing? Because you don't have to yeah, well, I guess, if you have to be like, wearing the same thing every day, looking a certain way, like the shirts that have to be ironed. I get you. Tammy does not like school uniforms, guys. Like for me, I'm like, I don't know, like school uniforms might not be that bad, but it can be a positive. I think, having to wear clothes, whatever clothes you feel like wearing. But there's free school transport. This is one that I don't think I've spoken about a lot, but there's a bus system where your kids get picked up at a particular bus stop, whatever route the bus takes, and it takes them to school and brings them home. And right now, like the first year, we had to walk maybe 100 meters, like to get to the bus stop. The first house we lived in when we moved to Canada, the one we live in now, the bus literally stops outside our house. I feel really I feel really grateful, man, because there's days where we're like late getting the boys out and they'll like literally be like running out the house and the bus is like just stopping outside of our house. So that's definitely a positive. And then, yep, no need to pay for security, no need to pay medical aid, and generally, no one taking things that don't belong to them. And I think this is one of the things that I absolutely love about the place that we live in. When you drive around, and I think this is something I can take and share on TikTok. So if you're not following me on TikTok, make sure you follow me, and I can post it on Instagram as well. But just showing how people leave things lying around. People can leave things lying around and nobody takes them. And by things, I mean bicycles. Like when kids are playing outside, you will find their bicycles are in the driveway. Their basketballs are in the driveway. They leave the hoops that the net rather, that they use when they're playing. So many things people will just leave out in the front yard. Nobody is going to take it. If you have something that you're even selling, maybe you can put a sign that this thing is for sale. You put it on your sidewalk and people are able to, I guess, come in and say, hey, I saw you have this thing that you're selling. Like I've seen golf carts being put like on the side of the road. People sell different things essentially, and they put it on there and they'll say, this is for sale. So yeah, Zintle says school uniform is expensive. That is true. And when you think about, I think when school uniform was started, it was supposed to just level the playing field, but then the schools had to get fancy, and say, no, if you're coming to our school, we're not wearing black and white. You have to have like these type of pants and this type of dress, and if you're having a blazer, it has to have this type of badge. And yeah, I think that just made it lose that, making it a cheaper option that makes a lot more sense. Because I think school uniforms, if they were still just, every single child wears maybe a white shirt, black pants, black shoes, whatever that looks like, it would have been the most simplest ways of going about things. But now we want to be fancy, we want to be fancy, and the schools want to be fancy. And some parents also want you to see that their kids are going to this particular school, which just complicates everything for sure. But yeah, no, I love the aspect, that every evening for my boys, when they're getting ready for the next day, I always have them, because they pick their own clothes now. They're at that age, but they will go pick whatever they want to wear. They show me. I'm like, cool. If it's not making sense for the weather, I tell them to change whatever that is, and it always works out very nicely. So Tassia says, thank you, Busi and Tammy, for being so open and honest about the whole process of immigrating. It is greatly appreciated. Puts a lot of things in perspective. I am very, very happy to hear that. And that is the reason why we do have these types of conversations. It's the very, very reason, because there's so many things that we also realized, when we moved, we didn't have a lot, we didn't have any, not any, because I remember when we were moving and we still had a lot of questions. One of my colleagues at the time, her sister lived in Alberta and she was living in Dubai, but she's originally from Germany. And she connected me with her sister, and they sat with us and we just had a conversation, and we were asking them a whole bunch of questions, but we didn't have people that we saw, even on platforms like YouTube, where people were sharing the everyday life like type of things and questions that we wondered and would have loved to have answered. So I am very, very happy when I hear comments like this, because that is the whole purpose and point, for us sharing what we share. So you get to see that, okay, I can move and I can make it work. I can move and I can make it work, and you go for it if it's something that you absolutely want to do. So if you would like me to help you unlock your path to success and overcome the challenges of immigration, you can book an Ask Me Anything session. So I have placed the link in the description where you can book that call and we can speak through what your plans are, where you even want to live, like we can help hash that out just based on your specific goals and your specific needs. Have a look at that, and I can let you know what my thoughts are, what my experiences are, and things that you should potentially be looking into, even from a resource perspective. And if you are somebody who is watching on your if you're somebody who is watching on your television right now, you can also just click on this link, just open your phone camera, and then it will take you to the place where you would be able to directly book the call. Set up that call and let's have that conversation. But just as a disclaimer, bear in mind that I am not an immigration consultant and I cannot give you any immigration advice, but I can definitely help in you planning out your things correctly, having a look at all of the different things that you can look at, and just ask whatever questions are top of mind to make sure that you're moving and you're making the most success out of your actual move. Okay, so let me just have a look and see if they are. You are our immigration fairy godparents. Ah, I might just coin that and actually we'll call ourselves that. I love that so much. Thank you, Kongi. Immigration fairy godparents. Ah, love it, love it, love it. And then Mr. H. Marsh. Hi, Busi, watching from Cape Town. With the highest cost of living and taxes, how bright is the future for Canadians and especially immigrants? Can you build something to have a comfortable retirement? High cost of living and taxes. So, when it comes to the taxes side of things, I always find that people who talk taxes are high, I think, in Canada, but when I compare them to taxes in South Africa, I can't really say like I'm noticing that big of a difference in terms of how we're taxed. People who I see on YouTube talking about high taxes in Canada are generally people who are coming from countries where they are not used to the taxation system. They're not used to getting taxed, or if they do get taxed, they're not getting taxed as high. But I do think that even with the higher cost of living, and also it depends which part of Canada you choose to go and live. So if, for example, you're going to go and live directly downtown Toronto, or you go and live in places like Vancouver, if you're in British Columbia, your cost of living is going to be way higher than somebody who chooses to live in, say, St. Catharines, for example, in the Niagara region, or just another town that is outside of those main busy cities. It's definitely doable, but you have to plan your things out, try and live within or below your means. And that is how you can be able to help yourself save for that future, right? If you're working for a company that has things like RRSP matching, which is the retirement savings plan here in Canada, make use of things like that, which can help you save towards your future. And we can definitely have a conversation specifically about that managing your finances thing as an immigrant, how you can best work around that, and all the programs that are available that you can make use of, whether it's using your tax-free savings account. There's now a new first-time home buyers plan that the government has started to make it easier for people to save towards their first down payment for a home tax-free, because here in Canada, unlike in South Africa, where you could buy a house without having a down payment, you need to have a down payment here in Canada. And that's one of the biggest things that becomes a challenge for a lot of people in being able to purchase that first home. So that is definitely a conversation that I will have with you guys on the channel live. So you can ask questions and we hash it out, and you come in, or if you are already here, you know that I am planning my things as best as I can, right? Okay, so one last question, and then we are going to shut things down. So Neo says, in terms of the challenges faced in the health sector in Canada, is it severe to paint that it could change a decision to immigrate? Challenges faced in the healthcare center, is it severe to paint that it could change a decision to immigrate? So By challenges faced in the healthcare sector in Canada, like what exactly are you talking about? Like, are you talking about the strain maybe that the healthcare sector has, the fact that there are a number of places where they still have a challenge in finding people who are working in the healthcare sector? Because I think also one of the biggest things that is a challenge in the healthcare system here in Canada is that the government looks for people who are skilled, right? In the medical field. But when people get here, there are a lot of professions where people have to go through a number of things just to get to a point where they can legally still work and practice in Canada, as for example, a doctor, right? And they need to go through different tests, which is going to cost a lot more money. So that ends up making the healthcare system not have as many resources as they would want. Where if you need to see a particular specialist, for example, you might find that the wait times are a lot longer. So on this one, I would say it depends. If you are somebody who has a lot of needs from a health and medical perspective, then I would say definitely look into this a lot more, because you might find that you are living in a country right now where even if you are having to pay, you can access a certain specialist maybe at a drop of a hat. The wait times are not as long, but you move to Canada and now all of a sudden they don't have as many specialists available and you need to wait a bit longer, even if you're not spending as much money in terms of accessing those specialists. But if you're generally a healthy individual, a healthy family, it might not be something that you look at and you think, I am not going to move to Canada at all because of this particular thing. And even with people who might have those special needs where you need a particular specialist, I still wouldn't say feel discouraged just because the country has their challenges in terms of having the resources that they need in all of the departments that they have, because the resources are still there. They're still there, and you're able to access certain things at a fraction of the cost, if any cost at all, right? So, this one, I also say it really would depend on your particular situation. But if you are somebody who has a lot of high care needs, then you would definitely have to look into the place that you're moving to. Because even with areas, when you look at places like Brampton, for example, here in Ontario, they have, I think it's one hospital for a big number of people, right? So if you are going to be looking for healthcare in that particular environment, it's going to take you a lot longer to get access to the care that you need, versus somebody who might be living in a different town that might have more than one place where they can go to if they need a hospital specifically. We haven't had any challenges living in Canada. I've had to take my oldest, especially, like from what I can remember, like he's had to go to the emergency at the hospital a couple of times. We haven't had any challenges like when it comes to accessing healthcare and getting the help and support that we actually need. So I definitely would say look at it depending on your unique situation when it comes to this, because there definitely are challenges in the healthcare system in Canada, and a lot of them I think have to do with the fact that they just don't have the resources that they need, and they also are making it a lot difficult for people who already have some of the skills they're looking for to come in and actually work. Okay, and then Zintle says, thank you so much indeed, Busi and Tammy, and congratulations on your citizenship. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who has joined. I've really enjoyed having a conversation with all of you. And I am looking forward to the next time that we speak. And I hope with this conversation, you can sit and ask yourselves questions and just think about what you are looking to get out of your immigration experience, so you can decide whether or not it's one that makes sense, so you can continue keeping your life on track. Because if you plan for things, it's going to be a lot better for you to work things out if things come up that you have not expected. So thank you all so much for joining, and I will see you on the next video.
Thank you for watching.